The nays are 49. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, as amended, is passed.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. There's a reason why Republicans, many of whom did not want Donald Trump to be their presidential nominee, dutifully, even enthusiastically lined up behind him anyway. There's a reason why they've been perfectly calm, even zen, about Trump ever since, even in the face of questions about his grip on reality, concerns summarized this week by Art of the Deal ghostwriter Tony Schwartz.
I know that two different people from the White House, or at least saying they were from the White House and that turned out to be a White House number, have called somebody I know in the last several weeks to say, we are deeply concerned about his mental health. Listen, what happens to a person who's under the kind of pressure and threat he is, and I believe that what accounts for that is Flynn's imminent flip or apparent flip, willingness to tell the story.
None of that matters to Republicans on Capitol Hill. Not Trump's insults against them, not his racist retweets, not his overall erratic behavior, which outgoing Senator Bob Corker, the only Republican to vote against the tax bill overnight, has described as turning the White House into an adult daycare center. There's a reason that Republicans don't seem to care whether Trump got into office with the help of a foreign power, and why they support him no matter how much he degrades the office of the presidency. Last night, we saw the reason, when the Senate passed a bill raising taxes on working Americans in order to cut taxes for the rich and corporations. Last night, the American people saw for themselves that there's only one thing Republicans actually care about: the holy grail of Republicans like House Speaker Paul Ryan, ever since they cracked open their first copy of Atlas Shrugged.
To get going to yoga, and that really helps me get through the day. I don't want you to steal my mantra, but my mantra in yoga is tax reform, tax reform, tax reform.
Joining me now, special correspondent at Vanity Fair, Gabriel Sherman, senior advisor at MoveOn.org, Karine Jean-Pierre, and MSNBC contributor Charlie Sykes. And Gabe, you know, Paul Ryan meant that to be funny.
Yeah.
But what we saw overnight, a lot of Americans don't find funny at all.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a tax bill that is blatantly tilted toward the super rich, not just the rich,
Yeah.
the top 0.1%. You know, it would cut taxes immediately on corporations to the 20%, and that's permanent, while giving some temporary tax cuts to people in the middle, but raising taxes on the poor.
Yeah, and you know, this is classic Donald Trump, where he was out there in recent days saying he was going to get killed by this bill, and every empirical analysis shows that this is going to be a windfall for him and his family and Republican donors. I think there's going to be second-order consequences, though, to this tax bill, because now that they have gotten this through and it's going to make it hopefully they'll get it through, as they hope, through the conference committee, then they don't really need Donald Trump for anything else. Right. This was the holy grail that Republicans sort of wanted. And I will want to see in the weeks and months ahead, as the Mueller investigation snowballs, we'll start to see them breaking from Trump, because they got what they wanted, which was the tax cut.
Yeah. You know, and there's been, Charlie, you know, this sort of duality between Republicans, other than Bob Corker, who's been pretty consistent. I mean, he said some pretty terrible things about Donald Trump, and he didn't vote for his bill. But you have people like Lindsey Graham, who've been on both sides of the Donald Trump issue. This is Lindsey Graham, Jake Tapper sort of calling out Lindsey Graham this Wednesday on his hypocrisy about Donald Trump.
You know, what concerns me about the American press is this endless attempt to label the guy as some kind of kook, not fit to be president.
Now, I have never said, and I don't think anybody here has ever said, that the president is a kook or that he's unfit to be president. But you know who has? Take a look.
I think he's a kook. I think he's crazy. I think he's unfit for office.
What a
Rejection is a real thing.
What a difference a year makes.
And it's not just him, Charlie. You've got Jeff Flake of Arizona, from Arizona, from the Hill yesterday. Flake is going to back the tax bill, but Jeff Flake gave that epic speech on the floor in which he talked about Donald Trump debasing the office of the presidency. You've got John McCain. John McCain, there's a piece in the Huffington Post that talks about the statements that he's made at the Naval Academy in October, in which he attacked nearly everything Donald Trump represents. But isn't it clear now that none of that really matters to these Republicans? They don't really care about that. They just care about what they did last night.
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue with all of that. I mean, the whole process was so incredibly shambolic, you know, loading it up with all those K Street goodies, you know, releasing a 400-page tax bill, you know, minutes before they actually take a vote, adding more than $1 trillion to the national debt. It really came down to two things. Number one, they desperately needed to get a win, and as you pointed out, this is kind of the holy grail. You know, and I've you know said before, you know, there's kind of a Faustian bargain here, and the Faustian bargain was always we're going to look the other way, we're going to rationalize, we're going to enable, we're going to defend as long as we get tax cuts, and you saw that. But also, this week really was kind of a microcosm of this whole process, because, you know, as you pointed out, you had the president, you know, tweeting out those, you know, racist, anti-Muslim videos. You had him, you know, suggesting that a media critic might have been involved in a murder, you know, bizarre behavior. And yet, this is the new normal, where elected Republicans basically said nothing. There was no pushback. So what a surprise that the president is feeling empowered to, you know, get in touch with his, you know, inner fever swamp.
Yeah, and I mean, Karine, you know, Nancy Pelosi tweeted out yesterday as this process was unfolding on the other side of Capitol Hill, quotes from Republicans. Congressman Chris Collins saying, my donors are basically saying, get it done or don't ever call me again. Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado saying, donors are furious, who the Denver Post tried to represent as sort of a moderate when he ran. Lindsey Graham, again, Lindsey Graham, the financial contributions will stop if we don't do this. So essentially, Donald Trump claimed he came in to drain the swamp. He actually said he would raise taxes on the rich. So all of that isn't true, but isn't it true that Republicans are really exposed here on not really caring about anything other than what they did last night?
Yeah, Joe, you know what? It's exhausting having to come on all the time to tell you and everybody else and lay out how terrible the Republicans are on the Hill. And unfortunately, they make it easy. Look, in the dead of night, they decided to horse trade on the backs of the middle class and poor people. For what? To give a pay cut, a tax cut? To their donors and big corporations. That's what we're talking about here. This is what Republicans have done. Like you said, it's the holy grail. But there are a couple of other reasons as to why they did this. They were worried about 2018. They're going into 2018. They have nothing to show for it. There are majorities in the House and the Senate. They have the White House, and they can't seem to govern. They've been completely ineffective. And so this is one thing that they felt that they needed to do. Another reason is, hey, they wanted to get this done before another person got indicted from the Donald Trump circle. So there are all those reasons as well. But they did this under the cover of darkness when Americans were sleeping, essentially, and did this because if they did this in the day of light, people would have rejected this process. A bill that is horrific, that is terrible, that at its best got maybe 28% of support from the public.
Yeah. If that, you know, and Gabe, you know, Charlie talked about this sort of Faustian bargain that Republicans have made. And, you know, Republicans, I've talked to Republicans off the record, you know, strategists who said the exact same thing. That, you know, it's not as if deep down they don't know that there's something deeply wrong going on in Donald Trump's mind. I mean, we're going to talk later about the fact that he's now saying it's not him on the Access Hollywood tape. His sort of connection to reality sometimes seems to be less than solid. But they do need him for one thing. And that is because they aren't popular with base Republicans, but he is. This is Donald Trump tweeting again something that's just demonstrably not true, but that his base is going to believe, right? This is Donald Trump this morning. We are one step closer to delivering massive tax cuts for working families across America. Special thanks to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who he's been hateful toward, and Chairman Senator Orrin Hatch for shepherding this bill through the Congress. Looking forward to signing the final bill before Christmas. And this was Donald Trump on the South Lawn of the White House. Speaking on the South Lawn, I think this is about the passage of the bill. Yeah.
It was a fantastic evening last night. We passed the largest tax cuts in the history of our country and many other things along with it. Tremendous tax reform. But it was the biggest package in terms of tax cuts ever passed in our country. Now we go on to conference, and something beautiful is going to come out of that.
the Republicans know that he can sell that to their base, and Paul Ryan can't.
Yeah. But, you know, what I think is going to be fascinating is in the months ahead, we're going to see the results of this bill and what Trump voters think when they see, you know, corporate dividends going up, and if they pay attention to that. I mean, that's also another question in itself. Yeah. But, you know, the actual base, the platform that Donald Trump ran on was not this bill. I mean, my reporting and other people have reported how Steve Bannon wanted a top marginal tax rate increase. Yeah. Actually, there was a very populist element to some of the Trump tax plans, and that's not this bill. So to what degree can he sell this bill of phony goods to his base? I mean, maybe they'll buy it. They tend to buy everything Donald Trump says, but clearly the tax bill that Mitch McConnell rammed through the Senate is not in the interest of the 30% of populist, working class, Republican white voters that form the base of Donald Trump's support.
Really quickly, Charlie Sykes, you worked in conservative talk radio. Will conservative talkers pretend that this is good for their listeners, or will they sing the Donald Trump line and convince people that they do like having their taxes increased?
No, they will support this. And I have to say, on a personal note, you know, I probably interviewed, you know, Paul Ryan and Ron Johnson dozens, if not hundreds of times on the issue of the national debt, how terrible the national debt was. So I got to say, it's very disconcerting to me to watch them flip around and support a bill that's going to add so much to the national debt. One other point, by the way, you know, for the deadline here, they wanted to get this thing passed before the Roy Moore election in Alabama, because I don't think that they wanted to necessarily have Roy Moore be the decisive vote on this tax package. But Gabriel's absolutely right. This will not get better with time. This will not age well, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out in 2018.
Yeah, absolutely. The estimate that it will add $1.4 trillion to the deficit, and maybe their voters don't care, but Donald Trump is the one who's going to be selling it. Gabriel Sherman, Karine Jean-Pierre, Charlie Sykes, thank you all. We'll have more. Thank you all. We'll have more on the Republican tax bill that passed the Senate last night, but up next, the bomb that dropped on the Trump administration yesterday. Michael Flynn cops a plea. Stay right there.
No, I'm not. And what has been shown is no collusion. No collusion. We'll see what happens.
The Russia probe is entering a new chapter now that Trump's former national security advisor Michael Flynn has pleaded guilty to making false statements to the FBI and agreed to cooperate with special counsel Robert Mueller. While lying to the FBI is a significant charge, it's what he lied to the FBI about that could have far-reaching consequences for the White House. According to Mueller, Flynn made calls to the Russian ambassador during the transition, asking the Russians to defeat or delay a UN Security Council resolution condemning Israeli settlements. And Flynn wasn't working alone. He was directed to lobby Russia by a high-level transition official. Sources tell NBC that that's none other than Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Flynn also asked Russian Ambassador Kislyak to refrain from retaliating against President Obama's sanctions on Russia for meddling in the election. Flynn and his future deputy, KT McFarland, allegedly discussed that members of the presidential transition team at Mar-a-Lago did not want Russia to escalate the situation. Now, all of this calls into serious question a line the administration repeated in the days following Flynn's ouster, that Flynn misled them all.
They didn't see anything wrong with what was actually said, but then we started thinking about whether or not Michael Flynn was being straight with us, and that's when we started asking a lot of questions.
Joining me now is Paul Butler, MSNBC legal analyst, Barbara McQuaid, former U.S. attorney, and Malcolm Nance, author of the book, The Plot to Hack America. Thank you all. So, Paul, I'm going to start with you first. First of all, we only have the White House's word for it that Flynn misled the White House. We don't have any other independent evidence of that. But so let's set that aside for a moment, whether he was truthful with the White House. But if Michael Flynn was essentially conducting foreign policy for the incoming administration while there was still a sitting president, could that violate the Logan Act? For those who are not aware of it, it's any citizen of the United States, wherever he may be, without authority of the United States directly or indirectly commences or carries on any correspondence or intercourse with a foreign government or other officer or agent thereof with intent to influence the measures or conduct of any foreign government or any officer or agent thereof in retaliation to any disputes or controversy with the United States or to defeat the measures of the United States shall be fined under the title or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both. Can you explain that in lay terms and tell me how often that's ever prosecuted?
So the idea is that the President of the United States is the person who represents the country before other nations. And so it's a federal crime for a private citizen to pretend that he's got the authority of the president. So it's the oldest, one of the oldest federal crimes around. It's been around since the late 1700s. How many successful prosecutions have there been? Zero. So there's never been a successful prosecution. At the same time, that doesn't mean that there couldn't be one. And it certainly sounds like that there was this representation that by Flynn, that he was acting on behalf of the United States. But here's the two words that Jared Kushner and Vice President Pence have to be worried about. Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart was prosecuted for lying about something that if she told the truth about it, it wouldn't be a crime. So at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter whether what Flynn did or what Kushner may have directed Flynn to do was a crime. If Kushner lied about it, which Mueller seems to think that he did, that's a crime, and he could go down for that.
And if he could also be threatened for going down to be put in prison for it and then be made to make a deal and give them someone else.
You got it. And Flynn has a sweet deal. I mean, he's got exposure for money laundering, for conspiracy to kidnap, and he's getting false statements. He's not going to go to jail for that. His son probably won't even be charged. They only make a deal like that if the prosecutor thinks that he can get someone higher up in the chain. And so what Mueller told Flynn is, there are people who I want to put in prison even more than I want to put your lying butt in prison. If you give us the goods on them, then you get a break.
Absolutely. All right, so let's walk back into it, Barbara, just a little bit on who could be in jeopardy, because there's the smaller people down the chain, and then we're going to get in a minute to Jared Kushner. But Sean Spicer, this is what Sean Spicer said on December 28th, and this was regarding what was happening on the call. This is once we learned that Michael Flynn was talking to Ambassador Kislyak, and here is what Sean Spicer said happened on that call and the subsequent conversations with McFarland. Take a listen.
The ambassador texted him back, wishing him a Merry Christmas as well, and then subsequently on the 28th of December, texted him and said, "I'd like to give you a call, may I?" He then took that call on the 28th, and the call centered around the logistics of setting up a call with the president of Russia and the president-elect after he was sworn in.
So, Barbara, that sounds all very benign, but one would hope that when he was in front of the FBI, if he ever gets questioned by them, that Sean Spicer will tell the truth if that's not the truth. Let's look at the timeline just for a moment. Michael Flynn talks to the Russian ambassador about this Israeli settlement vote on December 22nd. On the 29th, President Obama revealed that we were instituting these new sanctions. On that same day, Flynn then speaks with the Russian ambassador again about those sanctions. He then makes false statements to the FBI on January 24th. Then Sally Yates, 2 days later, warns the White House Flynn has been compromised. Obviously, they've taped those calls with the ambassador. And then Flynn tells Trump, a day after that, tells Comey that I need loyalty. Trump then fires Yates 3 days after that. And it just goes on from there. The Washington Post then outs the fact that Flynn could be subject to blackmail, and he resigns on February 13th. The day after that, Donald Trump tells Comey, I hope you can let this go, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, Barbara, if you are Mueller right now, who are you looking at questioning next to further, I guess, move your way up the chain from Michael Flynn?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was revealed yesterday was in that document called Statement of the Offense, where Mueller's team detailed the contacts that Flynn had with the Russian ambassador. And it reveals a couple of individuals who appear to maybe be those higher targets in the food chain. It makes reference to a senior Trump transition team official and a very senior Trump transition team official. So who are they? There's a pretty small universe of who those people might be. There have been reports that one might be Jared Kushner. There have been reports that one of them might have been Flynn's deputy, who was acting as a messenger between Flynn and Trump himself. And so it seems like those are the people who may be the targets of Mueller's investigation at this point. So who do you talk to figure that out? Well, who else was at Mar-a-Lago that day? Who else would know who was part of those conversations? It may be that Mueller knows who they are right now, but getting a full understanding of what their role was in directing Flynn to make those those comments to the Russian ambassador, I would think, will be part of the goal. And so he's closing in on that smaller part of the universe that exists above Michael Flynn.
All right, well, we know that Don McGahn, who's the White House counsel, is going to be questioned. We know that Jared Kushner, apparently, at least according to reporting, was instrumental in pushing Donald Trump to fire Jim Comey. One presumes, Malcolm Nance, that Donald Trump was at Mar-a-Lago at that point when they were having these conversations. Here is what Donald Trump said, and this was when, I believe Christian Welker was doing the questioning here. He was asked in one of these walk and talks about whether he directed Michael Flynn to discuss sanctions.
Did you direct Mike Flynn to discuss sanctions with the Russian ambassador?
No, I didn't.
Prior to your
inauguration? No, I didn't.
And would you have fired him if the information hadn't leaked out?
No, I fired him because of what he said to Mike Pence. Very simple. Mike was doing his job. He was calling countries and his counterparts. So it certainly would have been okay with me if he did it. I would have directed him to do it if I thought he wasn't doing it.
Malcolm, would it be credible to you if the buck stopped with Jared Kushner rather than Donald Trump in terms of directing Mike Flynn, or at least approving the idea of him having these conversations with the Russians in December after the election?
No, it would be absolutely incredible if it stopped with Jared Kushner. Look, Michael Flynn was companion to Donald Trump almost from the very beginning of this campaign. He had unlimited access. And apart from not being a married relative of Donald Trump, he was one of the most senior people there. So who in the transition was above him that would have been in a position to give him orders in order to do anything? It's quite possible Jared Kushner was one, and we saw that with reference to the Israeli, the resolution against Israel, and where they called Russia and told them not to take action. But on the other hand, with regards to Russia, with the Obama administration kicking out spies from the United States, that would have to be someone very senior indeed, and that leaves only Mike Pence and Donald Trump himself. KT McFarland, I believe, who was below Mike Flynn, is just going to have been a messenger for whatever the message was from one of those two top officials.
Do you agree with that? Who do you think would be, logically the next person? Who would Mueller want, Mike, in order to give Mike Flynn such a good deal?
So the director of the National Security Agency has pled guilty to a federal crime. And he, at this point, is a little guy on the totem pole. 5 people. The President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the Attorney General, the President's son-in-law, Kushner, or the President's son, Trump Jr. Those are the only people, I think, who it's logical to think are next in the sight of the Special Counsel Mueller.
Wow, well, we shall see. Paul Butler will be back in our next hour. Thank you so much to Barbara McQuaid and Malcolm Nance. And up next, Trump versus reality. Stay with us.
Something is unleashed with him lately. I don't know what is causing it. I don't know how to describe it. I think the last couple of days' tweets have been unhinged, markedly accelerated in terms of seeming a little unmoored.
With the Russian investigation ratcheting up the pressure on the White House and circling closer and closer to his inner circle, the question of Donald Trump's stability, even his attachment to reality, deserves a serious reckoning, especially amid reports that Trump has been telling people around him that in his mind, the voice on the Access Hollywood tape that we all know is Donald Trump and who Donald Trump acknowledged as Donald Trump is not actually Donald Trump. You heard that right. The New York Times reports that Trump told a senator in January, quote, "We don't think that was my voice." The Times reports that in recent days, amid mounting sexual misconduct allegations against powerful men, including aspiring Senate candidate Roy Moore, whom Trump supports, Trump has stunned his advisors with his ongoing doubts about the Access Hollywood tape. Among the other jaw-dropping revelations in the Times story, the world inside Trump's mind is still a place where Barack Obama's birth certificate is fake and widespread voter fraud robbed him of the popular vote. Joining me now, our business and political marketing consultant Tara Dowdell and former Breitbart media consultant Kurt Bardella. So Tara, I'm glad that you're here because you actually know Donald Trump. Right. You were on The Apprentice. You were a contestant on the show. Mm-hmm. Does this person who is now denying that it's him in the Access Hollywood tape, even though you see him in the tape and then hear his voice in the tape, and who's still apparently a birther, who still believes Barack Obama lied about his birthplace, and who still thinks he won the popular vote but for voter fraud. Is this the same person that you knew when you were on The Apprentice?
So I want to stipulate a couple of things up front. Number one, Donald Trump has always been a liar. So that is something that's been consistent throughout his entire, basically, life. But with respect to his behavior now, it is markedly different from what I experienced on The Apprentice, and also when I met him in my capacity on the gubernatorial campaign in New Jersey and when I worked in the governor's office in New Jersey. And what I see as different is I do think that some of these things that he's saying right now are still strategic, right? So talking about Obama's birth certificate, that's sort of where he retreats to, I think, for him when a lot of pressure and a lot of focus is on him. Yeah. But I do think where you see the distinction is he was able back then to look at a person, gauge them, and engage them as a chameleon based on what he thought that person would respond well to. And that was always sort of something that he did. So with us on The Apprentice, he very much wanted us to admire him. You know, we were there to compete for a job with him. So he treated us with a level of respect, and he was also sometimes charming. What I see now is his inability to really even change his behavior. He's just always angry. He's always compulsive. There's zero discipline. Not that he was ever particularly disciplined, but there's zero discipline, zero self-control now. And that, to me, is a sign that it's a very different Donald Trump, and that people say, oh, why are you on TV analyzing his behavior? You're not a medical professional. Sure. He's the president of the United States, and this matters.
Yeah. And, you know, Kurt, you have in the Washington Post, you have a story about Donald Trump essentially trying to reshape reality to make it comport to what he wants, but not just what he wants, what a lot of his supporters want. And this is an excerpt from that. It says Trump has asked others whether they think the voice sounds like him on the Access Hollywood tape, suggesting that it does not, and has wondered aloud whether perhaps the tape was doctored or edited in an unfair way to villainize him. He would just assert, and people would kind of say, okay, let's move along, said one person who's heard the comments. There's no point in sitting there and litigating it with him. A second person who has discussed the tape with Trump recalled, he says, it's not really me. I don't talk like that. It strikes me that that is very similar to the sort of conspiracy theories that you see on a place like InfoWars, on a Breitbart, that this actually kind of fits with what a lot of kind of his right-wing media support base wants to do. Do you think that he is consuming conspiracy theories, or that he believes them independently and is passing them along to these kinds of places?
I think it's both. I think they feed one another, because we already know that Trump's media diet includes reading sites like Breitbart, watching programming on other cable channels, and it's like they're talking to one another. And so when the media that he pays attention to only frames things a certain way, really to protect him, to mislead their audience, to mislead their supporters, he absorbs that and believes that to be truth. He regurgitates it. They report on what he says, which is based off of their own bad reporting and manipulation, and it just continues to go as a cycle. I mean, we're seeing from both sides of this, the media that he cares about and Donald Trump, the systematic destruction of fact and reason and truth. And it's doing, and I think they're doing it deliberately, because they've known that since Donald Trump became president, that we were going to get to the point where we're at right now, where the Mueller investigation was going to close in, where facts were going to come out that show that his own closest advisors, not people they'd never heard of, not people who were low-level interns or not associated directly with the campaign, the former national security advisor has flipped on him. They knew this moment would come, and the only chance that they had was to try to pollute the entire environment and make it so that the people who tell the facts are quote-unquote fake news.
Yeah, and that when the reality comes out, it doesn't matter anyway, because because nothing matters. You know, and Tara, on the point of the Mueller investigation, because, you know, in the previous block we were talking about, and Charlie Sykes made the point, and I believe Gabe Sherman also made the point, that at a certain point, once Republicans get him to sign the thing they want the most in the world, which is the tax cuts for the wealthy, they don't really need Donald Trump anymore, other than to sell it further to his base. But once it's sold and it's passed and there's nothing anyone can do about it, you know, there's a question of then what happens to his mental health when Republicans stop sort of fawning over him, which is what they've been doing. Donald Trump seems to be convinced that he'll be exonerated by the Mueller probe, right? He seems to have convinced himself of that. There's a piece that the Washington Post on Tuesday reported that Trump has expressed certainty that the special counsel probe into his campaign's possible collusion with Russia will be finished by the end of the year, complete with an exoneration from Robert Mueller. Ty Cobb, his lawyer, who a lot of people have criticized for serving him poorly, of not being a very good lawyer, is not walking him back from that belief. He's echoing it. There's a piece, and this was, I think this is the Washington Post, nothing about the guilty plea or the charges implicates anyone other than Mr. Flynn. The conclusion of this phase of the special counsel's work demonstrates again that special counsel is moving with all deliberate speed and clears the way for a prompt and reasonable conclusion. That's Ty Cobb's statement after there was an indictment, and a guilty plea by his former national security advisor. I wonder if that doesn't happen, and it's not going to happen, if the Mueller probe just escalates and Republicans move away from Trump, then what can you predict happens with him?
Well, I think that we're seeing it right now. He is unraveling. He's unraveling before our very eyes. Now, I think what confuses people is that it is a both-and situation, right? So he is also trying to be strategic, right? Some of these lies are some sort of strategy on his part, telling his base what he thinks they want to hear. That is happening too. So people, I think, are confusing and conflating the two. But the reality is that he is also unraveling. He could not deal with the pressure of the campaign. He had moments then. We saw him unravel during the campaign, and now he's the president of the United States, and he is not capable of dealing with this level of responsibility. Remember, at the Trump organization, there were times when Donald Trump wasn't fully in charge of what we thought he was managing. We thought, you know, his marketing arm made it appear that he was in charge of this massive operation, when reality was the banks had put people in charge of many of the properties because he was such a terrible leader, such a terrible manager. Remember, most of the buildings are his name having been licensed, and a team of consultants around him that manage a lot of that.
Yeah.
So the notion that he was ever going to be able, even in the best frame of mind, to handle this level of responsibility when he couldn't do it at the Trump organization, I think is all we need to know. And I do think that right now he knows. I think, you know, while I said he's unraveling, I think he also knows what the stakes are in this. I think this notion that he's stupid is not true, and I think that's part of why we see him unraveling.
Yeah, and you know, Kurt, you know, Donald Trump, you know, this sort of experience of those of us in New York who've known about Donald Trump for a long time, one of the things that's clear is that he wants to be liked, that he wants to be loved and adored. And he has really put his name on this tax provision, this tax bill. He's touted it. He's already this morning, he's out saying it's a great achievement for himself. He sees this as sort of a triumph for himself. But he's also the guy who promised a lot of people that he was going to raise taxes on the rich and protect the ordinary working person. When part two of this kicks in and the tax hikes go for the working people, and Republicans then come after entitlements, they come after Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, they're going to be more than happy to leave his name on it, right? Most Americans don't even know who Paul Ryan is. So when the unpopularity of this bill kicks in and it washes over Donald Trump, then what happens? Do the Breitbarts of the world just keep defending it? Do they throw Trump under the bus? Like, what happens?
I think they keep defending it until they get to the point where it becomes impossible to defend. I mean, really, Trump loves putting his name on things, as we all know. He loves owning these type of things. And without question, this is Donald Trump's tax reform bill. He went all in on this. And I think that there's going to be a massive backlash from the American people when they realize that, guess what, your taxes just went up. Your health care costs just went up. The things that you think you're going to get, that are going to benefit you, that your wages are going to get better, the jobs are going to get better, the economy's going to skyrocket for you. None of those things are, of course, going to happen, as every empirical data has told us. There's going to be such a massive backlash. They have done, Republicans and Donald Trump have done a horrible job of managing expectations. The biggest mistake I thought that President Obama made during the passage of Obamacare was when he said, if you like your plan, you can keep it. And while his intentions may have been good, the reality turned out to be a little bit different than that, and that really hurt Democrats in the midterm elections. They lost a majority. Well, here we go now with Republicans saying all these things that are going to happen for the American people, for the middle class, the working class in this country. None of those things are going to happen. Their life is going to get so much more worse. They will be held accountable at the polls.
Yeah, and then what happens for Donald Trump? Because then if he's expecting positive headlines out of this, and the process headlines will be positive because we know how the media works. They'll say Trump got win, Democrats passed bill. You know, and that's kind of, unfortunately, the way the media works. They're going to give him something like a positive headline. They're not going to be able to maintain that for very long. And once the pain kicks in, then what happens to him when he's getting blamed?
Exactly. And that's what's going to happen. I mean, that is just an eventuality. And so I think what you see is one of the reasons why Trump is so dangerous is that he's so easy to be manipulated, right? We know that. And so how you manipulate him is through validation. How you unravel him is through not validating him, and that is what's going to happen. And I think we're in for a very rude awakening. I don't see this ending very well at all. And yet, a reminder: we have not seen Donald Trump's medical records. All we saw was that letter from that strange doctor saying that he was, you know, as fit as a stallion or something to that effect. But so I mean, that's another thing. We have no idea what you know his medical records say.
Yeah. Oh boy, Tara Dowdell and Kurt Bardella with a happy segment here on AM Joy. Thank you both for being here. Really appreciate it. And coming up, the tax bill's consequences for you, for your bottom line. An author of Trickle Down Economics, who later changed his mind, joins us next.
in all fairness. This is going to cost me a fortune, this thing. Believe me. This is not good for me. Me, it's not so. I have some very wealthy friends. Not so happy with me, but that's okay.
To borrow a phrase, wrong. Donald Trump would stand to save about $35 million a year under the Senate tax bill that passed in the wee hours of the morning on a party line vote. Under the House version, which among other things would completely eliminate the estate tax, Trump's family would benefit even more, raking in a tax break worth more than $1 billion with a B. Joining me now, Bruce Bartlett, former Reagan policy advisor and author of The Truth Matters. So Bruce, the assumption that's underlying the idea of cutting taxes on corporations to 20% and cutting taxes on wealthy people is that when you give rich people money, they will suddenly turn it into jobs. They turn that money into like jobs, like spinning gold, straw into gold. But Gary Cohn, who's the chief economic advisor to Donald Trump, actually tested this proposition at a Wall Street Journal CEO summit back in November, on November 14th. And the editor says that well, let's just play it. Let's play what he did.
If the tax reform bill goes through, do you plan to increase investment, your company's investment, capital investment? Just a show of hands, if the tax reform goes through? Okay.
Why aren't the other hands up?
Why aren't the other hands up?
John, I've got a question for Gary quickly.
So, Bruce, I mean, the idea that if you give very wealthy people and corporations tax breaks, they turn into jobs, it's like just not true. Even CEOs don't believe it, right?
Oh, it's just complete nonsense. It's a lie. Bloomberg, Reuters, other organizations have done surveys of corporate executives. By and large, they all say the same thing. We're going to increase our payouts to shareholders. We're going to increase bonuses for corporate CEOs. This is not going to create a single job, believe me, except maybe among tax lawyers.
And what would be the justification in your mind that Republicans would have for raising taxes on lower income people? Because they spend all of their income. So why raise taxes on them?
It really defies comprehension. Maybe they think that the poor have it so easy that they need to have to pay more taxes to force them to go out and work more. The amazing thing is that people seem to be accepting this so meekly and mildly. It's really akin to rape. It really is.
You know, the thing that, Republicans have always said they care about were deficits, which I've never really believed that they cared about deficits, but they've said they care about it, particularly when there's a Democrat in office. But this bill, and this is 5 from my producers, is estimated to put $1.14 trillion on top of the national debt. And that's according to the Joint Committee on Taxation. So it's going to balloon the deficit. Is there any way to justify adding to the deficit, and essentially meaning that younger Americans, your millennials, et cetera, are going to have to pay the bill for it, in addition to later on having their own retirements, their Social Security and Medicare cut?
There is absolutely no economic justification for this tax cut whatsoever. In the past, when we've had large tax cuts of this sort, they all took place at a time when the economy was in a recession or just out of a recession. The economy right now is at full employment. That means we're not going to be able to reduce the unemployment rate further without sparking an increase in inflation. And I believe that the minute the ink is dry on this tax cut, all of the fiscal responsibility groups and the Office of Management and Budget and the White House will all be saying, we're shocked to discover that the national debt is rising very, very rapidly. We must do something about it, and it will all take the form of cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, just to make that point, this is the cut one from my producers, Marco Rubio basically admitted that on Thursday. This is Marco Rubio talking about step 2 after these tax cuts go into force.
So you have to do 2 things. You can't do one, you got to do both. You have got to generate economic growth, because growth generates revenue. But you also have to bring spending under control, and not discretionary spending. That isn't the driver of our debt. The driver of our debt is the structure of Social Security and Medicare for future beneficiaries.
So it's a 2-part question. Number 1, do tax cuts create growth? And number 2, are Republicans next coming after Social Security and Medicare?
Well, tax cuts can increase growth. A properly designed, targeted, revenue-neutral tax reform that lowered the corporate tax rate would probably increase growth. But this is just a giveaway. There's nothing in it that will conceivably lead to increased growth, and I think the estimate you gave of a loss of $1.1 trillion in revenues is way, way low. It's going to probably be upwards of $2 trillion when all is said and done. And secondly, Marco Rubio basically gave away the game, which is something Republicans have been doing for 40 years, which is called starve the beast. They believe that the only way they can cut entitlement programs, which of course are very, very popular, is to create a deficit so large that there is absolutely no other choice. And that's the real tragedy is that when Democrats regain control of Congress and maybe the White House, they will have to do the dirty work.
Wow. Bruce Bartlett, sobering news this morning. Thank you. Really appreciate your time. Thank you. And coming up, the next step after Michael Flynn's guilty plea and your moment of Maxine with Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Stay right there.